And welcome back to another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports Podcast. A editorial where I, Richard Harris, talk about why I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s. Today's topic is a repeat topic, a topic that I talked about just recently, maybe a week ago, and it was coaching. One of the biggest reasons why I chose to do this topic in terms of why I chose the 80s and 90s sports podcast as my bane of disdain is I feel that today athletes, coaches don't know how to coach the game the way it's meant to be played. And I feel that every coach today, an athlete today, feels that he or she needs to redefine the sports. I think that he or she needs to feel like they're revolutionizing the sport. I think that he or she feels like they are changing the way the games are played. And unfortunately, most games don't need changing. Fortunately, the game itself will always be front and foremost. And if you can't play the game front and foremost, you're not going to succeed. Now, what do you say? What do you mean by that? If you can't put the ball in the basket, you can't win playing basketball. You can't score touchdowns unless you have the Ravens defense of 2000 or you have the Bears defense of 85. You're not going to win football games. If you don't throw strikes in baseball, you're not going to beat teams. If you don't score runs in baseball, you're not going to win. You can't get your first serve in, you're not going to win too many matches. Nor if you don't have Tiger Woods' ability to scramble out of the rough, the woods, the bunker, the water, whatever, you're not going to win golf tournaments. And so I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s because there was a standard. People understood to win, you play the games a certain way with integrity, intelligence, and efficiency. This weekend alone, just listening to the announcers, watching the sporting events, watching games, you sit there and you say to yourself, I know I'm not a pro. I know I'm not a professional coach. I know I don't play the game as well as he or she does. But what the hell was that? In the 80s and 90s, yeah, there were moments where you scratched your head. The most famous in football probably was the Niners played the Bengals in a regular season game, and the Bengals had the lead, had the ball, under 10 seconds to go in the game, under, normal circumstances, you either punt and kill the clock that way, or you don't. And they chose not to punt. They had the ball at their own 20-yard line and decided that on fourth down that they would try to get the first down instead of punt. And they figured that the time would run out because there wasn't a lot of time left in the game, I think. And so it doesn't matter what they decided to do, the game would end or they'd get the first down. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to heaven. They didn't get the first down, and the clock didn't run out. The referees gave the 49ers 1 second, and when you got the other black Jesus playing, you throw him the ball. And sure enough, 20 yards, 1 second, one-on-one, Jerry Rice. Who do you think's going to win that matchup? Jerry Rice. And the 49ers kept their streak going because they had a streak of winning something crazy like 19 straight road games. And that should have ended that day, but it didn't. Because the coach at the time, I believe it was Sam Weish, decided that was the best way to beat them. And it didn't happen. Now you fast forward 35 years, and you have San Diego, aka the Los Angeles Superchargers, playing against the Vikings. It's 4th down and 2. Chargers have the ball. Probably should punt. Force the Vikings to drive a long distance to get the victory. What do the Chargers do? This coach, who for the last 3 years has made some of the most outlandish, crazy decisions in games, and thus the Chargers are every year the one team that everyone talks about as chokers, or always involved in one-score games because their coach thinks that he is smarter than the football gods, smarter than the other coach, and basically smarter than you, me, and anyone else who watches the game. And he gets bailed out sometimes because his decisions don't cause him to lose games all the time. And sometimes his decisions get masked by the fact that they play well enough to keep themselves in games that gives them chances to still win in spite of him. So he decides to go for it. They get stopped, and now Minnesota has the ball, not on Minnesota's side of the field, no. They have it on the Chargers' 25-yard line, 30-yard line, something like that. And they drive the ball down to inside the red zone, inside the gold zone, inside the 5-10-yard line. And luckily for the Chargers, Kirk Cousins claimed he couldn't hear a play call or something like that, and the pass was thrown and it was deflected 3 times, and the Chargers got the interception, and they won. And then this clown sits at the end of the game and says, well, we had a plan, we had a play call, we thought it would work, da-da-da. And he does that every week, where he sits there and has to explain to us, why does he go on 4th down so much? And it's this generation of coaches. They think that they are smarter than you, me, and everybody else who watches the games. Watching the game last night. Watching USC over the last year. Running the ball down people's throats. The Rams were last night. Had a good running plan going. Had good matchups for them on the offensive line against the Bengals defensive line. But what do the Rams do? They throw and kept throwing. And you're like, why do you keep throwing when you just ran down the field? Don't get it. You look at coaches that get young quarterbacks today and think, well, because the new thing in football today is to get a young quarterback who is athletic and who can run. And so therefore we're going to call running plays for him and make sure that he is not standing back there taking hits. And then they call plays and they're just like, he just ran for like 15 yards and now you want to, now granted you don't want to run your quarterback every down because you don't want him to get hit. And the offense is, blocked well. But I don't get what plans some teams have for certain players. Justin Fields in Chicago is going nuts because his coaching staff doesn't know how to coach him, and he doesn't know how to play football because he wants to be a guy who can stand back there and throw it and show that he has a hand cannon, which he does. but he ain't got the weapons. You thought he might have, but he doesn't have the weapons. So they need to be a running team. And what teams do is they dare him to throw. And so he doesn't throw. He takes sacks. He throws terrible balls. He tries to run, and there's nowhere to go. And you say, well, who's that on? Is it on him? Or is it on the coaching? Or is it on general manager? It's on all the above. Because they wouldn't build a team around you if they thought you couldn't handle it. And yeah, Chicago has failed in building a team around him so far, but they got pieces. He's not a bad player. And so I don't get what the thinking is. See, every era of football has had geniuses. And they've had geniuses that really succeed well, and those who call themselves a genius who aren't geniuses. Like Eric Mangini, he wasn't a genius, but he had beaten the Patriots, and so people thought, oh, okay, he's a genius. Well, where's he been for the last few years? He ain't coaching anywhere. Certain teams, college, pro, and NFL, have had coaches that truly are geniuses. Bill Walsh was a genius. But what people don't talk enough about is that Bill Walsh and Don Coryell came from Paul Brown. Paul Brown was a man before his time teaching football principles that they really couldn't use in the 50s, in the 60s. And so Bill Walsh said, hey, I can modify it. Don Coryell said, I can modify this, and I can make a system out of this. And thus the West Coast offense was born. And every coach has people who they call are their disciples or they're part of their coaching tree. But most coaches come from the teaching of somebody from the 50s, from the 40s, from the 60s, from the 70s. Some great organizations like the Pittsburgh Steelers have only had 3 head coaches in the last 55 years. Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Mike Tomlin. And the Steelers' principle has not changed in 55 years, which is defense, run the football, don't turn it over. We win. And thus they have a ton of Super Bowls on their shelves. But there's so many other coaches who have disciples from this wing and that wing that it's just a regurgitation of the coach that they previously had. Just they don't have the talent. In college football, you have Nick Saban. He has disciples all over college football and in the NFL too. He too was a disciple of someone. And people would question for years until recently, none of his former coaches could beat him. You know why? Because he knew what they were going to do. Because he would do it. Now, Kirby Smart recently has had some success against him. Maybe Kirby figured some things out. Jimbo Fisher, he's had a couple of games of success. But the bottom line is it took a very, very long time for somebody to beat St. Nick, as he's called. But the point is, just because you have a philosophy that you learn from somebody doesn't mean you have to employ it. Sean McVay has a ton of disciples all over the NFL now. All these young coaches in their 30s and early 40s were his babies, and they try to coach like him. The only difference is he got a ring, and he's been to 2 Super Bowls, so whatever he's tried, though crazy and controversial at times, worked for at least 1 season or 2 seasons that got him to the big game. and it got him the brass ring or the gold ring. But these other guys, makes you scratch your head and you wonder what in the world they're thinking. And instead of them coming up and saying, I was wrong, I made a mistake, I have no clue, I was on a gut feeling. They want to try to give you scientific reasons. They want to try to give you logical reasons that sound so dumb and so illogical that you go, what? You look at baseball. You listen to the announcers who used to play the game. The announcers who used to play the game will say something about the game the way it's played. Yes, if they were a particular team, they will smooch that team ad nauseum and it makes me sick. But the announcers will say something that makes sense in terms of how the game is played because they played it and they're trying to rationalize what it is that they're seeing today. And for some reason, they think they've rationalized what is happening today in baseball, which makes no sense. Because pitchers don't throw pitches when they should. The stupid rules that make no sense for the game have hurt the game, but everyone's trying to play ball. Everyone's trying to, be a team player. And I find it funny. People can't stand New Yorkers for a lot of reasons. But one reason why people don't like New Yorkers is we think that we know too much. Not that we know too much. It's that we see things that, and we say things that other people won't say or don't see. Michael Kay, Gary Cohen can call a baseball game and compliment the other team, talk about the greatness of the other team, and oh, by the way, talk about the Yankees and talk about the Mets. But these other teams have to keep it real about their teams. They can't talk about nobody else. I love Chip Caray. Chip Caray, when he was with the Braves, when he was with the Cubs, he kind of is a national announcer. Joe Buck, national announcer. Tom Brennaman, national announcer. But these homer guys, they can't talk about other teams. They have to talk about their team, and they have to talk about it in such a way that makes their team superior and makes their team better than what they are. And they talk about the game to favor their teams as well. They try to explain why Hunter Green is throwing this pitch and that pitch when he should simply just be throwing the right pitch. Mark Gubicza every night with the Angels out here, they talk ad nauseum about Ohtani, and like you look at stuff on paper and you watch the games and you say, Ohtani's great, fine. 10-5 record isn't spectacular. A 3 earned run average is okay, is actually pretty good in these days, but in the 80s and 90s it wasn't. But the teams he's dominated, Detroit, the White Sox, they have the worst records in the league. He's not dominating Houston. He's not dominating the Yankees. He's not dominating the Yankees. Have a bad record this year. But my point with baseball is the announcers used to tell you certain pitches, why they throw certain pitches, and Gubicza does that. Gubicza tells you what pitch they're going to throw, why they should throw that pitch. And the pitchers don't throw it. And the Angels are 70 and 88 because of it. They don't know how to play the game. They're not being taught the game properly. And I listen to the announcers to have them tell me that. And some of them do. But it's not on the announcers. It's on the managers. It's on the coaches. I mean, why aren't you bunting? Baseball has changed now. So why aren't the Mets running? Why aren't the Cardinals running? Why aren't the Yankees running? Why aren't the Padres running? Why don't the Angels run? That's the game. You can't say to me, well, Lindor has got his 25th stolen base. He might get 30. He's one guy. It has to be a team-wide thing. Brandon Nimmo, the leadoff hitter, has to run more. Marte was running, and then he got a concussion. He ain't played in a long time. But that's because he got a concussion, not because he's not running, but because he has a concussion. It had nothing to do with running. Other teams built their teams to placate these new stupid rules. And they're succeeding. And the 6 teams I just mentioned aren't. 5 of those teams were playoff teams last year. So, my point, and then I'll stop. They don't play the games the way they used to be played. Basketball, too. 3-on-1 fast break. Instead of going to the basket, maybe throwing an alley-oop, nope, they pull up for 3. Every team has an offense geared around the 3. Centers aren't playing center. They're playing wing. They're on the behind the 3-point line. Brook Lopez slips behind the 3-point line. Embiid, the reason why he don't dominate the league like he should at 7'3", 280 pounds, is because he wants to stay behind the 3-point line. He wants to shoot jump shots instead of taking people to the basket, getting fouled. That's coaching. That's why these leagues today and games today stink. The Clippers have, a typical center. Zubac wants to stay in the paint, do his damage in the paint. Guess what? The Clippers don't give him the ball. They want to shoot threes instead of give him the ball. DeAndre Ayton, he's another 7'3" guy. He don't want to play in the paint. He don't want nobody bouncing on him. He wants to shoot threes. He wants to shoot perimeter. That's coaching. So I'm going to criticize the coaching as long as the game is being treated in the way it's been treated. The still ultimate goal in football is to score touchdowns. In baseball, it's to score runs or to be stopped from scoring runs. In basketball, it's to score baskets or to be stopped from scoring baskets. Nobody plays defense in basketball. Nobody plays defense in college football. So I didn't mention those things, but that's the goals of those games too. Hockey is to put it in the net. And so until those things change, the games are going to stay the same. The methods of getting those things change, but it's not changing for the better. It's actually changing for the worse. But like a fool, I keep watching.